Africa date back to the late 60s with police actions against the Namibian liberation movement, SWAPO, and the support given to white Rhodesians in their war against the Zimbabwean liberation movements. And from 1975 until 1989, the South African military fought a bloody war against the Angolan government forces and their allies, the Cubans. During this same period, attacks against ANC facilities in southern Africa cost many lives and created much suffering. The story of South Africa's regional wars and the destabilization of neighboring states is too big a story for the Truth Commission to deal with, and it is certainly too big to tell in this program. So let's focus on the brutal raids across our borders which targeted individuals, officers of the liberation movements, and suspected bases.
The raids in Lesotho, 1982 and 1985. The raids in Matola, 1981. The raids in Swaziland. The raids in Mozambique. The raids in Angola. The raids in Zambia. The raids in Zimbabwe. The raids in Botswana. All were because of the policies of P.W. Botha. We must never forget our history.
Between 1979 and 1990, South Africa attacked 3 African capitals, launched 6 major raids into 4 neighbouring countries, and routinely sent bands of hitmen on missions to murder in the Frontline States.
We have identified about 250 individual cases of gross human rights violations in the region.
By 1980, South Africa was surrounded by unfriendly neighbours. Most of the Frontline States played host to the liberation movements, who kept personnel, bases and transit camps as close to home as they could. In 1980, the ANC made their presence felt with a raid on the Sasol oil refinery.
We had deep penetrations operations. So this led to the same kind of operations here against the military bases of the liberation movements within the neighboring countries. So that part of the war is how that developed. And it was therefore an absolute necessity for the defense of South Africa to embark on these kinds of operations. Now that led to the concept of cross-border operations.
They saw themselves as part of a Western anti-communist crusade, and in this, of course, they were largely encouraged, particularly during the Reagan-Thatcher era, to think along those lines.
Ons is in die huidige oomblik in 'n intense revolusionêre aanslag gewikkeld.
The other dimension, of course, was a perception which was deeply held, particularly by P.W. Botha and the State Security Council up until 1985, and that was that the primary threat to South Africa was external. The Matola raid was in January 1981. It was a combined operation in a planning sense. It was planned by 2 senior figures in the security establishment. Jacques Buchner was one from the SAP side and a Major Steyn from the South African Defence Force. They planned the operation. They provided the intelligence. They had got the intelligence through interrogations, through their sources in Mozambique. They gave the information about the houses and who one could expect to find in the houses. The actual operation was conducted by special forces, specifically 5 Recce, which was based in Phalaborwa.
ANC Member of Parliament, Professor Rob Davies, was in the capital Maputo in January 1981, when the special forces attacked suspected ANC bases in the suburb of Matola.
What happened was a South African commando crossed the border secretly and drove the 70 or 80 miles or whatever it was to Matola. Basically, I think one of the things which was a feature of this was that they just opened fire indiscriminately in the houses that they targeted. I think the basic modus operandi was to shoot first and ask questions afterwards.
A large number of the operatives in that attack were actually Rhodesians. These were Rhodesians who had enormous experience of cross-border operations, particularly in Mozambique during their war, and who had come down south, had been recruited into special forces after 1980. And in fact, the 2 who died, the 2 attackers who died, both were Rhodesian.
Krish Rabilal was among the 12 ANC cadres slain that night. He was a student visiting Maputo from Swaziland. His brother saw the aftermath of the attack.
I was shocked to see the hundreds of bullet holes on the walls and the ceilings. It actually gave me an idea about the extent to which these people were so brutal. And apparently my brother survived the attack initially, and he had crawled to a cupboard. But I think the SABC soldiers followed the trail of blood and shot into the cupboard without opening the cupboard, and he was riddled with bullets.
You have to be able to morally justify the means that you use for this attack. Can I put it simply? You didn't bomb the whole of Maputo for housing a small ANC base in Maputo. You tried to pick out the base itself. Secondly, again, proportionality. The force that you use must be proportional to what you want to achieve. And then thirdly, what is also very important, and that is you must take all the necessary steps in order to minimize the effect on non-combatants.
The first Maseru raid, that's the December 1982 raid, where 42 were killed, 30 South Africans, 12 Basotho. That again was a jointly planned. The same individuals, Buchner and Steyn, who were involved in the planning of the Matola raid, and again special forces.
In 1977, lawyer Phyllis Naidu escaped arrest by the security police by skipping across the border into Lesotho. She was at home in Maseru on the night the special forces attacked.
I worked till about midnight and then had a shower. It was a hot day, and went to bed. But it was a beautiful moonlight night, and I drew the curtains and I was just watching the trees in the moonlight. And then I heard a shot. And I didn't lie on the bed, I sat on the floor, and then there were several shots, and then I covered my ears with the pillow because I couldn't take the noise.
By morning, much of the ANC community in Maseru was dead. Phyllis Naidu and her fellow survivors faced a grim task.
The first house I went to was Zola. Zola was our chief rep, and I walked through, and everything was just blown to smithereens, and blood. I mean, it was like an abattoir. And this, just to see Zola's body there, you know, with his red tartan underpants. He was such a shy human being, you know. Gentle, gentle, gentle.
The intelligence seems to have been least good in regard to Botswana, where in a number of the raids they killed non-South Africans, and even some of the South Africans who were killed were not MK operatives. They were exiles, they were refugees, but mostly they were involved in sort of cultural resistance.
I was inside when they broke in and started shooting. I was inside, so luckily I went under the bed, and my brother and my sister tried to lie down just next to me, and when they walked in, they shot them.
Are you a member of the ANC?
I'm not, but my brother was.
Good evening. Worldwide anger continues to grow in the wake of the commando raid on alleged ANC bases in the Botswana capital Gaborone. Foreign Minister Mr. Pick said in September last year that the Botswana government had not been able to reach acceptable understanding with the South African government on the combating of acts of terror against South Africa from Botswana territory.
The targets that we attacked, one can describe as the nerve center of the ANC, the alternative which they developed after the Nkomati Accord. They then decided to operate through Botswana.
Wat die militaire implikasies betref, dink ek het ons vir ons gasheerlande, of liewers moet ek sê vir die gasheerlande van die terroriste, sowel as vir die terroriste self, twee duidelike boodskappe gegee. Die eerste een is, die Suid-Afrikaanse regering maak nie ydelle dreigemente nie. En die tweede een is, die Suid-Afrikaanse weermag is in staat om hierdie terroristneste by te kom en uit te haal waar hulle ook al is.
9 people died in this attack. Among the dead was Jackie Quinn, whose family testified at the TRC in 1996.
I feel that as long as the people up top that gave the orders are exposed, that it's going to help a lot. If we can find out, it must be somebody in government, they must have known what was happening at the time. I think that's the main objective.
The second Maseru raid is a different operation. It was a Vlakplaas operation. It was led by Eugene de Kock. The operatives were all Vlakplaas operatives, a number of whom have applied for amnesty. The second raid occurred at a time in December of 1985 when the South African government was extremely irritated about not only the position the Lesotho government was taking with regard to support for ANC, but an increased pattern of infiltration. There's a State Security Council minute on the 20th of December 1985 which identifies a number of steps to be taken against Lesotho. They talk about slowing down the border, the flow of goods, and they actually use the term geweld, force, oor die grens, geweld oor die grens.
Felicia Azande Dlodlo's husband, Theophilus Dlodlo, was a commander in MK's Transvaal unit based in Manzini. He was killed in a shootout on May 22nd, 1987.
The nearest hospital to where my husband died would have been the Babane Government Hospital. We went there and we were told at the time that we were too late, but yes, there are 3 bodies that were brought in the night before, and we could come on the Sunday morning. We went there very early on Sunday morning, and the lady said, "Can you describe your husband?" Because, she didn't want to open all these various trays and shock me. And I described him and I told him what he looked like and everything. So she says, okay. Then she pulled out the tray. At the time, it was marked unknown. And when he pulled him out, then I saw him. He had blood all over him. And he had a white shirt, but it had bullet holes all over. In fact, it was just red.
Swaziland was perhaps the country that suffered most in the 1980s, when Vlakplaas and other security police units raided it year after year.
The bigger picture reveals that there was a very powerful infrastructure of support within those countries, and particularly in Swaziland. We have been given information about the number of informers that operate from inside Swaziland, both particularly in the South African expatriate community. We have information about hoteliers who gave free accommodation to Vlakplaas. We have information on restaurateurs who would give free meals to Vlakplaas operatives. It's not an entirely one-sided story. It's a story also of, from within those countries, considerable collaboration.
Many of the attacks launched beyond our borders targeted individuals, and apartheid's assassins even travelled as far as Europe to take out opponents. The April 1990 attempt on the life of Michael Lapsley was the last time the embattled nationalist government used the strategy of cross-border raids. The forthcoming amnesty hearings, especially those of Vlakplaas policemen, may give us a clearer picture of who did what, where, despite the fact that the Truth Commission can't indemnify people for crimes committed in other countries.
We've had a great reluctance on the part of individuals to talk about what happened in the region because of this difficulty with the amnesty provision, that it may not necessarily apply. An amnesty granted here doesn't apply, say, in Botswana. And that, of course, has been a major disincentive to people to talk.
If we should, for example, under oath, make a statement in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that gets known right through the world, then some of the neighboring countries can say, well, but this is a contravention of our own laws, and we now ask for extradition.
Former CCB chief Joe Verster is amongst many who have declined to disclose their cross-border operations for fear of extradition. But the TRC has not faced the same reluctance from former policemen.
I don't think it would be would be proper for me to divulge all the information about these incidents at this point in time. I am, however, prepared to say that, or to mention that he's applied for amnesty in respect of cross-border raids that were done in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, in Swaziland, in Mozambique, one in Lesotho, which was very important, obviously then the one in London, and then I'm not sure as to whether you could really depict the two other ones as international incidents, but he was also involved in attempted coup d'etats in the former Ciskei and Transkei, and he's also applied for amnesty in respect of those ones.